for me, this is what works for me. I actually arrange like smaller events to lead up to the bigger event. So depending on what I'm doing, so if I have a big, show coming up, I will do pop-ups in different places. And I find that one, it tests out my choreography a lot better. And two, because I'm also a hands-on learner, I know what I'm looking for in terms of connectivity. And when I have that, I know the bigger event will be successful. So there's some time to kind of, maneuver between these pop-ups that gets you to that bigger stage. It's not easy. Being an artist is never, and that's the one thing I hope one day individuals will realize, that it's not just about putting on a show. You have so much more work to get to that full theater, right? So if your theater has 1,000 seats, you're not going to sell 1,000 seats just by posting on social media. There's no way. A website doesn't matter. If you're not going out there and talking to people and inciting and conversation, reactions, it's very tough to get a full house. That means you have to bring in somebody that has the ability to carry their name. But how do you then create your own ability to carry your own name, right? That's the biggest step. And I think we don't get enough mentorship or encouragement on something like that and how to kind of create that for yourself. Because it's definitely a very individual journey, but there are certain steps that allow you to kind of test out your theories. So in choreography, especially let's say for Bharatanatyam in particular, one of the most famous dance styles in India. But in terms of choreography and content, it's extremely Hindu-centric. And only because, well, there's a lot of, history there that it would be too complicated for us to go into now. But when you talk about a population that's entirely Hindu, what is the one thing that relates to you in themes, in shows, not just dances, but in movies as well? So there's always a central value around the Hindu religion in our style. But there are still a lot of hypocrisy values. There are certain mindsets, especially with colorism, ageism, with women in politics or women dynamics in stories as well. So it hasn't been visited as often as it should have, only because I think the religion's also adapting as much as it can through the evolution of society, community, current events, right? So here in Canada, when you want to choreograph something like that, it's, I think, considered going against the grain on both ends. So in a very Canadian mainstream mindset, most folks are actually very much used to a Hindu centric dance show from us. It's expected. But when you kind of slightly go off base and try to kind of relate a little bit more to your audience, there are some questions saying maybe this is not as traditional. So we still have some work to do in that sense, trying to represent just the style rather than the tradition. So in terms of choreography and content, I wouldn't say there's a lot of freedom. It really depends on your peers that are around you. I was very fortunate enough to have some peers that were really open-minded and then started their own ventures, which I was able to join in later. But if you're going through a very traditional give and take, it is very much mandated. I do have to be clear on that. So the box of what you're known as diverse here in Canada is truly a little bit more traditional, a lot less freedom of thinking. So you do have this give and take, meaning you do learn quite a bit about the traditional process, but because you're being raised here in Canada, your values are very different. While trying to maintain a traditional mindset, there's a lot of questions that may not get answered. So it's helpful when you're with your senior dancers as a junior dancer to be able to filter that conversation and go through it. Some change is inevitable, depending on where funding comes from, who's organizing it, and at the end of the day, what the goal of the performance is. And then sometimes it's not possible for that kind of give and take, unfortunately. But I've had both sides where I've had to, showcase my loyalty to the arts or the industry in maintaining a traditional mindset, but then also now being much more independent, now being on my own, having my own, flock, so to speak. I have a little bit more knowledge and confidence to be able to just give the students what they need and hopefully let them grow in their own format and try to support that rather than trying to force what they should be supported for. We are a theater style. How it's presented is very different versus what the style is known for. So we are known for big tableaus, very big storylines. It's very seldom that we're supposed to be chopped up into small, segments of, such stories or hymns. That's more of a modernized version of our style, I would say, because of colonialism, because of trying to, get to the finish line first. There was different business plans, I guess, back in the day that kind of allowed for this kind of exchange to happen a lot more quickly, which is why a lot of us around the world can now learn it very quickly. But when you want to take it back to its roots, it is a very much a theatrical dance form. I think it really depends on what type of festival. Is it showcasing just pieces? Are you all connected? If you're all connected, I think there would be a better way for the artist to be able to enter, because there is some sense of trying to ground themselves, get that topic, that content, see what everyone is doing, and then to plug themselves in or to contribute in some way. If it's a little bit more separate, that's also very much doable. But I think more of a conversation with the artist would be necessary for that. We still have a long way to go with artists having the ability to connect with the audience members, because our art form has so much been about this is what you do to connect with your audience. The actual experience and morphing yourself into that line is not as common as you think it would be. The struggle is still there to find that balance. And it's unfortunate because I think there's a struggle with trying to maintain the tradition, trying to also maintain your own, honor yourself, I suppose, in your own choreography. I will reach out to people. Google and YouTube are very much a good first step to get your basic understanding of how things are supposed to go. But I really value people's experiences far more. And the arts, I think right now, they're like having the corporate mindset is necessary, I think, especially if you want to, franchise, or if you want to jump into other markets or perhaps other provinces or cities. I think you do need a little bit more structure when doing so. That helps. But if you're trying to create a more of an organic reach, I think corporate marketing and corporate services just don't do enough justice for artists. It's not enough. I think we have a very particular niche that we need. And so I looked to other artists, I looked at theater companies. I've sat down with a lot of theater administrative, folks, and I've just met with them. And I said, how did the pandemic go for you? How, what do you see locally? How are you modifying, adapting? And how are you encouraging folks to come back? I think right now people feel a lot more comfortable coming back to performances, as you, I'm sure, have seen as well. But how do you sustain that audience? How do you build that relationship? And I think that's a very individual journey, but there's a lot to learn by communicating with your peers within your industry. And I think you can come together a little bit more. I think in Canada, we have a very unique situation. Either people are insanely competitive and really don't want to work with you. I find that most folks do want to work with you. They want to learn from you. And I think you want to learn from them as well. So I always try to get my basic understanding as much as I could. And then I venture out and I cold call. Sometimes it's not easy because you don't get a response. And that's been my biggest source of learning, always. Yeah, lately it's been Zoom, but I used to fly out. I used to, because I also want to see what they're doing and how things are going. New technology, especially in theaters, is so interesting to see. And not every theater company has the funding to get some of the new tech, but when they do, coming and having the ability to see it. There's some theaters in the US that, have established, some really cool ideas of, I think in the Russian ballet, they used to have snow come out during the Nutcracker. Some of the US ballet companies have started that, but how do you that environmentally friendly, cost effective? Is it necessary? What was the thinking process behind that? I'm always so interested in seeing those dynamics from other dance companies and dance styles. Because I think it's an element one day I want to add with Indian dance, but I kind of want to see that process. And I think I learn better hands-on forever for me personally. And I try to honor that. And so because I'm investing my own funds, might as well do something that works best for me and, try to learn as much as I can. Yeah, very much so. All the way from basic things like my social media content to, choreography content. I actually made the decision a few years ago to not put any videos of my work, meetings. I do some pictures maybe, but I find that we get poached quite a bit. And not even just from within the society or industry, even from funders saying that they're representing something and they put up a picture from workshops saying, hey, this is what it's going to look like with no credit, no, identification whatsoever. So it's been a little disappointing to say the least. And you also want to be responsible for what you put out there in a more controlled environment. That's hard though, especially if you want to sell more tickets and if you want to have more dates for concerts. So it's really a decision that's personal, I think. But for our industry in particular, copyrights was never spoken about. And it's definitely coming around in full circle right now because of the way the modern styles were created. They were definitely poached from a community. We don't have a lot of traces about who owned what, although when you go through, books, when you go through current events or historical events, you can kind of trace it back to certain individuals, but, they have been used, taken advantage of to the point where a lot of these artists were on poverty and disenfranchised. So the conversation currently now is how do we acknowledge this going forward? Just like the land acknowledgement that we have here, individuals like myself and a few others, we also acknowledge this particular action so that we can say, we're not sure who we should credit this to, even though it was taught by XYZ. Truthfully, it goes beyond this. And we want to make the audience aware of that. So we try to do it justice in that way. And it still doesn't solve the financial problem and the respect, I guess, and dignity that's been taken away from a lot of these artists. But going forward, there's some artists from those lineages that are starting to come back. And so it's in my interest for me to try to work with them and ensure that their copyright is protected, mine is protected, artists in general are protected, but there is a definite resistance for that. And it's unfortunate, but I'm grateful I'm in Canada. I have a law, I have structures, I have a charter. Although copyright is still very much an issue that has not been addressed, I think it will be, and it will be very much a forefront within the next few years of negotiations. When you hire artists, when you commission everybody, there is a certain value, I think, that will be placed on that for law. I've never been in an official mentorship program. I think that would have been extremely helpful for the dance world. I see a lot of it coming now, and the age, restrictions go till 25, which seems to be unfortunate, sadly, because I'm in my 30s. I'm like, I wouldn't mind going back and getting back into the theater district to get some mentorship. But what I did have was a lot of, I guess, senior dancers around me. I was always one of the youngest growing up, and being able to learn quickly, I was quickly thrown into some of the older dance groups to fill in the number, to fill in the quota. So I eventually, by watching, by learning like extra steps, it kind of gave me that kickstart. And it would be probably my mid-teens where I would have a lot more hands-on experience because, well, I've been around for so long. I already know how to do it. So more production opportunity, more choreography opportunity, and more independence when it came to managing, my own load, students, choreography, shows, and things like that at an earlier stage. And I think one of the um, notions we had growing up is to always do that for the next generation as well. And even within the South Asian way of teaching, it has been more of a give and take. With your teacher, it's a little different. There's a very different relationship, but the expectation, I think, within the schools or within your communities and clubs is for the give and take to happen naturally. And so I think a lot of folks or a lot of artists in my generation would have experienced something similar. This is where it may, be valuable when you have mentorships, because as an artist, this is the number one question I ask. Why are you an artist? And for me, my answer is a lot more convoluted. And it's always, I don't know, maybe I got my start in a different way. So I sort of see a journey of an artist so much more different than really just going out and perform or showcasing your art. And so that's always been the question I have when I have young dancers coming and working with us or or attending our programs. And the common answer is, well, I just want to be on stage. Well, what does that mean? How are you? What for? What is the goal? What is the purpose? And so while it may seem incredibly straightforward and a common element that we do talk about, it's actually not something that artists kind of develop early on. And I feel like maybe that's where we lose the capacity of retaining artists, because they haven't been given that opportunity or encouragement to do so. So when you talk about, an experience of an audience member, that has to be almost the critical point of any artist's presentation, right? For a show or for a concert, whatever it may be, even for a festival. What is the goal of that festival? Just to showcase art? How so? Everyone else does it. What is yours, in particular that stands out? That's a very important question in order to, one, brand yourself, but two, be able to sell tickets and then continue on that tradition should it be a repeat every year or every few months, or to be able to expand. And that's a very important point also that allows you to work towards, right? And it's complicated because, one, you want to balance out what you're presenting on stage, but if you're not taking into consideration why you're doing it, that kind of doesn't match and you lose that momentum. It depends. If you have a sold out show, yeah, absolutely. People want to stay back. They want an experience. For me, so like if you were to ask me what my idea of a show is, it's from the moment they enter the theater. How does that experience do this? And this is how I am politically as well. How do I connect with you one-on-one? How are we going to interact? And that very much is from the moment they step in till I take my final bow, and there's maybe some space afterwards to continue that interaction. So I think instead of looking at it as a reception, look at it as what kind of experience you're wanting to offer your audience. It's extremely important because then you get branded as that. Because sometimes it is as simple as having some cocktails at the end of the night with your fellow audience members and cast members. But truthfully, what does that do? Are you cultivating a relationship there? Are you selling more tickets? Are you selling an experience? Or are you just wanting to reach out and seeing, how they reacted to your performance? What value are you bringing to that, right? You've asked them to pay a certain dollar amount. You have to kind of justify that now. Is it just for them to get their buns into the seat and watch your show? Is there something else? It's hard because there's a lot of organic growth that has to happen before you have exponential growth. And if you're not nurturing your organic community and organic audience that you've cultivated and have amassed in the last few years, it's very hard to make that jump. But to relate to these individuals, you have to know them. So what are their struggles? What are they working on? And then to showcase our work, I will do weird things like put different sound over different video. I will, edit the heck out of it so that you can't actually play the track. I do have safety fail safes in all of the stuff that I tried to put forward in that sense, to be able to put it forth. I have not, only because I look for a few things. I try to see if they're offering something that isn't offered before. Right now, there's a lot of research being offered up as the voice of the industry, I suppose, especially within Ontario. Sort of like this is how our struggles. But when you look at the panel, when you look at the research that was involved, no one in the BIPOC community has been really communicated with. So it's still very much, Eurocentric. And as much as they do try to open it up to the BIPOC community, I still think there's a little bit more of an organic reach that needs to happen. I don't think everyone feels comfortable enough to come into those scenarios. But with that said, there's a lot of mainstream theater programs that are now inviting BIPOC curators, dance companies, to really be part of their main stream lineup for the year, which is huge. That's probably the first time I've seen it more regularly here in this year alone, right? Every mainstream theater or festival in Toronto has now included a series of folks, which is huge. What is being presented is still a very old school mentality, I think, within our community. So I'm hoping there's some artists that will take that venture, myself included, to be able to, showcase a different side of the Indian classical community. Absolutely. I think artists or administrators are very much looking to connect in a place where their voice is heard. So I don't think any question would be inappropriate. I think it would be refreshing and probably create a bit more of a trust as you create that survey and create that community for yourself with other artists around, whether it's in the province or within Canada or around the world. That trust value is very much, it falls upon what you give, right? So if it's a standardized survey, I'm sure people would fill it out, but I think there is a need for it to kind of go beyond, especially if you're trying to curate a bit more in terms of resources, in terms of individuals. Everything kind of matters at that point. So what your goal is, I think, would definitely reflect what your survey is. I think the expectation is how you word it. So do we showcase enough BIPOC content? What would you suggest if we don't? What do you vision, or even a general consensus? Because now I find almost every other answer is, I would like to see more diversity, right? So you could also include it in that terminology as well. You do have to tread lightly for sure, because you don't want to also say, well, is there a need for BIPOC pieces or communities? And well, the answer is obvious, I think, in that sense, but of course we do. But also it depends on who you're sending the survey to see what that answer would be. But for me, I like ripping off the Band-Aid a little bit, only because, again, building that trust with my community of dancers is important to me. So I've asked questions that are very much against the grain. Do you see religion problematic in your pieces? If so, would you prefer to create something else? Would you even put funding for it towards something else? Is that even going to be accepted in your area where you are locally? Understanding their mindset, understanding why they're in the arts also helps. I think so. You have to kind of curate those questions so you can follow that pattern in order to get to those questions, I think will be important for you. So I hold artist circles, and this last year I actually got back into politics. I took a little bit of time off and did our campaigns, but coming back, I've done more of them in person, and still on Zoom as well. One thing I do find, smaller groups help. It helps watching someone else take that step and voice their concerns and opinions. Some folks like to stay anonymous, cameras off. They'll just type in the chat. So we try to create a safer space. So depending on the content, depending on the questions you are asking, you may or may not want to have it in a public place. You may want to have it more of in a private place that allows them to come in and communicate. Because one thing I do know within the industry, depending on your experiences, there's a lot of vulnerability there. And, especially putting yourself out on stage, already that's an incredible step and milestone for a lot of individuals. But to really fully expose yourself and your opinions, I think that it just depends on the group, depends on the community you've created. I've had folks come to me saying that they like to talk to me one-on-one. It doesn't happen as often, but I find smaller groups work best, at least for what I've seen in my experience. The smaller groups have worked best.